know what really makes us mad? Is wasting money on CDs with only one or two good songs.
Yeah. Tell them about punk.
What's up, posers? Welcome to Punk Lotta Pod. I'm your co-host, Justin Hensley.
I'm your other co-host, Dylan Hensley.
And this is the show where we choose one year at random and select one punk, hardcore, emo, or punk-adjacent album from that year to discuss. Except this week, we are doing a Patreon-sponsored episode. And before we get into all of that, welcome to the first new episode of 2025 that features both of us. The best of 2025 was actually our first release of the year, and then we followed that up with a guest list audio. But this is the first mostly regular episode that we've done in 2025. It's the first one we recorded together.
Yeah, I was out of town last week, and then you did the guest episode, so that kind of worked out scheduling wise. Yeah, and we said this on the Patreon that we had just recorded, that it feels like we're further into the year.
Yeah.
As it has been eventful.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Definitely a very eventful 2025 to start with. Don't know that that's a good sign or not.
No. It's definitely not starting on a great note for me.
Yeah.
We are, as of recording this, in the midst of wildfires in the LA area. The long and short of it, things look more positive today than yesterday. So, I'm personally not expecting to have to evacuate, but still just keeping an eye on that situation. But as of the release of this episode, hopefully everything went okay. But certainly will still be, this area will definitely be still needing relief efforts. It's yet to be told what the, full destruction, devastation will look like. So anyway, hopefully we'll have, links and things to share. And I mean, certainly I can speak, as of this moment, can speak to the mutual aid LA network is definitely a great place to look if you're looking to be involved and make donations and find links to orgs that you can support. It's not orgs necessarily as it is just kind of individuals. And that's what mutual aid is. It's not just a disaster relief program. It's something that is done all year long. That's definitely the first place to look, though.
Yeah, definitely an eventful start for the year, and hopefully, maybe things will get a little better, but you never know. We'll see how things go. But we are still here, week in and week out, plugging away at this thing against our better judgment, and hopefully producing something that you find entertaining or a distraction. We don't tend to get super into current events when we do this show. One, to kind of help it have a little more of an evergreen feel to it, but also too, it's like, we know that most people that listen to us are probably on very similar wavelengths when it comes to this type of stuff. So feels like a little bit of preaching to the choir type scenario. But, every once in a while, there's something we feel compelled to discuss. But yeah, for the most part, I like to think of us as a little bit of a distraction. So let's get into the show. This week's episode is a Patreon-sponsored episode. So if you head to patreon.com/punklottapod, you can do all sorts of things over there. One, you can sponsor an entire episode like this one. You sign up for the one-time $10 donation, and then you get to choose the album we devote an entire episode to. And that's what we're doing today. And I'm very excited about the record that we're going to talk about. And very thankful for our patron, Zach, for supporting that one. But we'll hear more from him later. You can also join at the $1 tier where you get access to all of our weekly bonus audio. And what did we do last week, Dylan?
We did a bracket on the year 1992. So we pitted albums released in 1992 in head-to-head combat.
Yeah. 16 bands enter. One band leaves. It's, it was a fun episode we put together. I think that was a pretty good batch of records that we had there to compare. It wasn't a ton of stuff that I was not super interested in. So it was a good, strong one. So if you like some 1992 deep diving, head over there. Or you can sign up for our $5 tier, which is the producer/listening club tier. This will get your name said on the podcast every single week. So thank you to our producers, Dave Brown, host of the podcast One Band, Five Songs, as well as the writer of the blog Oklahoma Lefty. Thank you to Jason W., writer of the newsletter Songs About Chocolate and Girls. And also thank you to our buddy Steve Long, host of the podcast Rebel Rock Radio. And you could join in our monthly listening club at this tier where we get together on a video chat and discuss an album together. We haven't selected the first episode of 2025's album yet because our idea was to choose a record from 2025 for us to all listen to and talk about together. So we're keeping our eyes open for stuff coming out this month, and hopefully we find something interesting enough that will appeal to our group of producers in there. So all of that is patreon.com/PwnColatoPod. And today's episode is about an album released in 1992. And while we did talk about quite a few records from 92 on that bracketology episode, there's more to talk about. So as usual, we go to rateyourmusic.com, go to the charts, put in punk, and sort by popularity, and we get not punk records. Number one on this list is the Rage Against the Machine self-titled record.
Yeah. I mean, it's all right, I guess. I do not love that record. There's good songs, but I don't think it's a particularly good record overall. Rage Against the Machine, I feel comfortable with just keeping them as a singles band because I've never heard a record by them that I loved.
Yeah, front to back. Yeah, there's not a lot that I've really sunk my teeth into. You know what I don't want to sink my teeth into?
Sonic Youth?
Yes, anything Sonic Youth has ever done. Not a fan of this band. This is their album Dirty, was released in 92. I don't know, where is Dirty in their discography? Is it post Goo? Yeah,
it is
post
after Goo. It's the one immediately after Goo.
Yeah.
I've heard some of Dirty. It's fine. I don't as strongly dislike Sonic Youth as you do, but I'm not bought in. I'm not all that invested. I would say Daydream Nation, Goo, and Dirty are records worth hearing, but I don't need to listen to them more than once. So I haven't given Dirty like a proper full listen. I probably have not given Daydream Nation a full proper listen either. So I don't know what else is like important enough that I feel the need to listen to the whole record. I've heard enough of the other 80s records, the earlier 80s records, and I'm just like, I'm not listening to this. I don't care about this.
1992 is also the year of Wish by The Cure, which probably has one of their biggest singles on it. Features Friday I'm in Love, which that's a huge song. And probably one of their most played songs today. Like, this song is huge.
It's funny because that record is like one of the last widely acclaimed Cure records. Bloodflowers 2000 record has good ratings, but it's nowhere near as popular as Wish and some of the previous records.
Though, if you look at the Rate Your Music for the newest Cure record, it has a higher score, so 3.87, and more ratings with 14,000. So
yeah,
users of this website weren't going to let that record come out without listening to it and rating it. Meanwhile, I didn't listen to it. Did you?
I listened to it. I think I talked about it on our wrap up of the year. It's good. It's a good record. Sounds like The Cure. If you're really into The Cure, I think you'd enjoy it. I'm not that into The Cure. Even records like Wish or Disintegration or Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, like the real poppy stuff, all of his records are too long.
Yeah. Very long records. We have, to keep this in Spin Magazine territory, there's a PJ Harvey record called Dry that came out that year. Don't know. It's one of the higher rated PJ Harvey albums. Is it the first real one? Yep. It's their first record. Yeah. Rid of Me is the next one that's a little bit more well known, as well as To Bring You My Love. But yeah PJ Harvey.
I've heard Rid of Me. I've never listened to Dry. But
yeah, I've never listened to Dry either.
She's pretty good.
Yeah,
I think I'd rather listen to her than Nick Cave.
At this point. And we've got the Beastie Boys, Check Your Head. This is a record I've never listened to. And I've listened to like most of the records from this time period. I don't know why I skipped this one. Is this a real record?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. It's a true studio album. Okay. I don't know how I listened to the first two, skip this one, and then listen to like the next two.
I don't think I've ever listened to this one in full. I've definitely heard a good chunk of it.
Yeah. What do you want to talk about here?
Not Swans. Let's move on quickly. No. Forever on these charts, and I will never listen to them. I guess I should probably have a Brutal Truth phase soon, since I did my Napalm Death week. I've heard some Brutal Truth. They're pretty good. Need to Control is like the one record I think I've listened to in full. There's that Television Comeback record. It's pretty good. I've heard people say it's their best, which I think is contrarian, but it is a pretty good record. Speaking of Napalm Death, Utopia Banished. That's a pretty good one. I think that's the maybe first or second. I think it's like the second record with Barney.
I mean, I guess some notable albums we should mention that came out in 92, Kerplunk by Green Day. Now, while they weren't quite what they would become in a couple years, it is a record that definitely stands out from this year in retrospect. We also have 40 Ounces to Freedom by Sublime. I don't think I realized this record came out this early. For some reason, I think of Sublime as a little bit later into the 90s. But nope, 1992 this album came out. L7 released Bricks Are Heavy. That's pretty important grunge record from a band that wasn't one of the big grunge bands. And Forever the Offspring Defender Ignition came out that year, which is the second Offspring album. And it's a solid record. Not their best yet either, but still very much in that skate punk, Bad Religion, Agent Orange sort of sound that they were going for at the time.
Mondo Bizarro by Ramones came out. Is that the most skippable Ramones record outside of Acid Eaters?
I was looking at it and I was like, I can't even. Poison Heart's on there.
That's it.
Strength to Endure's on there too. That's
right.
Good one. But that's kind of it as far as like standout songs. So yeah, I mean, Acid Eaters is definitely more skippable, but you can kind of get away with that.
You can hardly count Acid Eaters because it's cover record.
Yeah. So I would say this is probably better than that, but
yeah, probably.
If we take out all the covers the covers album and just leave it to their all original material, yeah, I could see this being one of the more skippable ones.
His Brain Drain's pretty good.
I Believe in Miracles, Pet Cemetery's on there. Merry Christmas, I Don't Want to Fight Tonight. Yeah. I mean, you could maybe say, well, what's Halfway to Sanity got? And then we'll... Garden of Serenity. That one could be. I could see Halfway to Sanity being slightly more skippable than Mondo Bizarro. If it was your selection on what we would talk about, what would you choose for us?
It's not a super dense year.
Yeah, I would probably want to choose something I don't know. Like a record I haven't heard from this year.
Well, I mean, we talked about it on the bracket, but The End of Silence by Rollins Band, that might be one to do. It's a pretty important record. I don't like that Sugar Cubes record could be interesting. But I guess it's not the one. Like their first record's probably the one to do.
Yeah, you could get real weird and do something like Iceburn, Firon. You could go just in that strange direction. If this was the Medical Chronicles, we'd be talking about that Starkweather record that came out that year.
Yeah, that would be one I could consider.
Definitely a weird album. There's a Bullet La Volta record. That one could be interesting to check out. That's the it's like a who else was in Bullet La Volta? Is Clay Tarver Chavez. That was his band. There's also a Moving Targets connection to that band too that could be interesting to check out and see. Ken Chambers. Well, he's not on this record though. So yeah, that's an interesting band. I guess you could always do something like Mega City 4 and try and figure out what that band's whole deal was. They get kind of called an emo group at times, and I don't know if that's actually accurate, but
you could do that with it might be too much, but you could do the Virus 100.
Oh yeah.
Compilation.
The Dead Kennedys tribute album.
It's one of the more interesting things from that year.
Yeah, 92 is not deep. When I was actually putting together the brackets for our bracketology, I was kind of having a hard time because I was skipping stuff that we'd previously covered. And then I was like, I don't know if I'm going to have enough. And so then I put in a few things we had previously done the episodes on, and it filled it out a little better. But yeah, if we were to come back to 92 and do another bracket, I'd have to open up to EPs just to see what else, what else is out there, or like non-punk records that are just like called like indie rock at this time.
Yeah, which is maybe worth looking at alternative and indie rock at this time period, because there could be some notable records that Slanted and Enchanted by Pavement. That's certainly a very notable record. There's definitely some shoegaze stuff. 92. Oh, okay. Here's one that should be on the punk charts. This is a perfect example of a record that should be on the punk charts, but isn't because of this website that I would pick if I saw it, and it'd be pretty high on the charts. Copper Blue by Sugar. That's the one to do.
Yeah, that is definitely the one to do. That's a big record, stands the test of time. One of the best albums that Bob Mould ever released. Should be called punk. This website, man, they insist on not calling anything punk, but here we are. Yeah, that would be a huge one to do. And I guess if you look at, there's some interesting stuff. There's Juliana Hatfield put out Hey Babe that year. I was trying to see who else had, records under the indie rock name that year. I guess the 3 Mile Pilot would be interesting to talk about just as a pre-Pinback band. With Zach in there. And 92. Yeah. Interesting. It's a case of radio rock kind of becoming, we're in the grunge territory during this time period. So that was basically underground music getting mainstream attention, for one of the biggest points in its history. And so I think that's why I've always kind of chalked up like punk in this like early period, struggling with an identity due to so much independent music becoming top 40 rock. So yeah, not a peak year for punk music, but there's worse and there's better too. Well, let's get into the album that we are talking about today. So we were assigned the album Frenching the Bully by the Gits. Stats on the band. From Seattle, Washington, they formed in 1986. This was released November 25th, 1992, and is the band's debut album. It was released on CZ Records, and the personnel on this album is Matt Dresner on bass, Steve Moriarty on drums, Joe Spleen, aka Andy Kessler, on guitar, and Mia Zapata on vocals. And the album was produced by Scott Benson and engineered by Steve Fisk, who had previously produced music by Soundgarden, Beat Happening, Nirvana, Unwound, and the Screaming Trees. So for some reason, their engineer had way more credits than their producer did. But I'll hold off some more of stats. But before we get into this record, we were sent a voice note kind of explaining why Zach selected this record for us. So take it away, Zach.
Take 75. Hey guys, this is friend of the pod, Zach, out in Oregon, just to say a few quick things about one of my favorite albums of all time, The Gits, Frenching the Bully. I think, the only person in the chat Discord that doesn't have their own podcast, so I'm pretty bad at talking and recording it, as you will find out in the next couple of minutes. But The Gits, very special band for me. I was 13 years old. The year would have been 93. I had just started going to some local shows, lots of exciting music in Portland around that time, namely like Pond and Heat Miser, Cracker Bash, bands like that. So I used to get to shows two different ways, one of which was I had a friend with a cool dad. Thank you, Robert. Rest in peace. And the second was that I would help my mom's friend shovel out her horse stalls of horse shit. And then I would work at her horse farm, and then she would take a couple of my 8th grade friends and I to shows in Portland, which is about an hour away. Anyway, so we go into Portland to see Pond. Still one of my favorite bands. Great band, Pond on Sub Pop. Check them out if you've never heard them. But one of the opening bands was the Gits, who I had not heard of, but at that age I would pour through any magazine and catalog that I could get my hands on. So I had heard of them, and I was excited to see them. And although I had been to a few shows, I had never seen a true punk band play. And they absolutely, I would say my first emotion was being frightened. The crowd was a lot more active while they were playing than the band before them and any other band I had seen before that. There was like stage diving and stuff and, moshing. It was the first time I ever got kicked in the head by someone crowd surfing. I did not cry. It was just very thrilling. I'd never seen anything like it. A lot of the music going around at that time was, even stuff I still love, was just like a little bit more arty and a little bit more like indie sounding. But the Gits were just like bluesy, hardcore rock and roll with absolutely no pretense. They weren't dressing up or anything. They were just out there kicking ass, and it completely blew me away. I went out and found their tape shortly thereafter, and I've been a fan ever since. I can think of maybe like 5 other albums that have been in constant rotation since 1993, and that's one of them. The Gits are just like one of those few bands, I guess. It's almost like if you're a fan, you're part of the club. Like, if you see somebody else with a Gits shirt when you're in the wild at a show or whatever, like, you have to go talk to them. You're just like, oh man, the Gits, and it just like gets people pumped up. I have this ratty old Gits shirt. I can't tell you how many times I've been somewhere where I just get stopped in the street, at the hardware store, at a show, whatever, and people just like have to talk about them. In fact, last year I went to a show. I went and saw Pretty Flowers, also a great band, and an older woman came up to me and she's like, oh, like the Gits, my band used to play with them back in the day, and which piqued my interest because I love that period of music, that like early 90s Pacific Northwest stuff. And I was like, oh, cool. Like, what was your band? And she goes, Dead Moon. I was like, I know who you are. So suddenly I found myself face to face with Tootie from Dead Moon just because I was wearing a Gits shirt. I don't really have anything else to say other than that. The music speaks for itself. There is, of course, part of the Gits story is I think it was 1994, Mia, the singer, was walking home from a bar and was brutally raped and murdered in the street in Seattle, and it became this big news circus. Understandably, it was even on Unsolved Mysteries and stuff like that. Unfortunately, I think that terrible tragedy kind of co-opts the narrative of the band so much that it becomes more of like a news story rather than the story of the actual music and the people in it. But it's really a touching story, and if you ever see, they have a documentary about the Gits too. The thing that's really touching about them is they're just like, more than anything, they were 4 really close friends. They lived in the same house. They hung out together. They all went to college in Ohio, which is where they met, and then moved to Seattle. And they all just seem like really cool people, love their music, and I guess I'll quit talking. But thanks for the opportunity, you guys. Nice getting to know you on the Discord. I feel like we're friends now. I think once you communicate in a chat and you've watched more than one video of somebody drinking Mountain Dew in their car, then you're friends. So glad to call you guys friends. If anybody else I can really recommend, the $10 is a tremendous bargain to have a couple people analyze a cassette you bought in middle school on a podcast. So take care, guys. Look forward to listening to the episode. Have a good one. Bye.
Well, wow. Okay, lot to unpack there. Thank you, Zach, for the $10 and for choosing this album for us to talk about. This album has actually been on the slate to be discussed in previous attempts. Usually just something else went out over it, but it was a case of we were going to get to it eventually. So maybe I shouldn't say that, and you might demand your money back. But
Oh, we were going to do this one anyway, but thanks for the money. Yeah. No, but I mean, yeah, I think this record has been kind of boiling under for a long time to talk about, and it's the Gits in general is just a band that I'm like, there's something really important there that we should talk about. That and I mean, there's definitely like there's the tragedy of Mia's untimely passing and like how that overshadows the band, but like that more than that story, I have wanted to talk about the Gits like for a long time on this show. So I'm glad to finally be pushed over the edge to do it. Zach's Gits shirt reminds me of like, I don't know if maybe everybody has that shirt that just like always gets a compliment. But like, I think for me, my Frodis shirts are the ones where I have someone go, "Hey, I love your Frodis shirt," more than any other band t-shirt that I wear. Like, it's the Frodis guys have to talk to you.
Yeah, my shirt that got more comments than anything I've ever had is my Goonies shirt, of all things. For some reason, that is a touchstone for so many people that it's just like they have to say something when they see that shirt. And I famously recounted a story on the show where this dude literally chased us across an entire park in Nashville where we were clearly not interested in what he has to say to us. Like, hey, we're good. Trying to wave him off. He followed us across the entire park just to say, "I like your Goonies shirt. I have a pin." And it had like Mama Fratelli on it. It's like, cool, man. That was a lot of work, and you stressed us out, and we did not enjoy this park walk. So thanks.
You didn't need to follow us to tell us that you liked this movie that everybody liked.
This massively popular movie from the 80s. That For some reason though, that one imprinted more than a lot of other movies for people. But yeah.
Well, speaking of the Goonies and Portland, I just saw the Rock. On Cannon Beach at the end of the Goonies.
Yeah.
I didn't go up to a story. I didn't see the Goonies house. That would have been too much extra travel out of the way.
Yeah.
From where we were, but.
And I also wanted to say, Zach talking about actually being friends. Thank you for watching those Mountain Dew videos, those Moon Pies for Misfits videos. I make them for myself mainly, and then I'm just like, maybe somebody want to watch it. But I also I did actually ask Zach for some recommendations for restaurants for Dylan, for you whenever you went up to Portland. So I think I wound up getting you a gift card from a different place, but I definitely was like, hey, sign us somebody in Portland. I should check out, I see what they say to check out. So
yeah.
So yes, Zach, you are a friend, and we appreciate you. Also, you should think about having a podcast because you've got a voice for radio for sure.
Yeah, you're not any worse at talking into your phone than I am talking on this podcast on a weekly basis.
Yeah. So, okay, let's get into this record. So the Gits, what is your backstory, previous feelings, thoughts, anything prior to listening to it for this episode?
I want to say I didn't really become aware of the Gits until we started doing this show. And I started deep diving like the punk charts on regular music a lot. I think that's probably where I would have heard the Gits for the first time. And I might have just been like going through, and it might have been we did a record from 92 at one point in the show. And I was just like kind of going through albums that came out in 92 and like sampling stuff. So I would have heard a little bit of this record and was like, wow, that's really good. That's really interesting sound for the time period. I mean, Mia's voice is like immediately like the thing you kind of notice when you listen to them. So it was kind of like just filed away. I was like, okay, the Gits, okay, they're a Pacific Northwest band. So that kind of fits into like a weird little corner of music that is still, I mean, even now, still pretty mysterious to me. And then I have previously listened to their follow-up to Frenching the Bully, the 94 album Enter the Conquering Chicken. So I listened to that record just off of deep diving on the Rate Your Music charts, and that would have corresponded with my reusable calendar system of deep diving on specific years of music from a couple of years ago, maybe 2 years ago. So it's probably been about 2 years since I listened to that record. And that's the record that came out after she had died, I want to say. And so it's kind of like what they had recorded, and like maybe some live stuff is on there. I think there's a couple live recordings on that record. So it's kind of like cobbled together, and it's kind of released more in tribute of her than it was like their intention to release it. But it would have been what they were working towards for the next record, from my understanding. So I had listened to that in full prior to actually listening to this record in full. But I really enjoyed it. And then I'm glad. I feel like I got a little bit of a sense of the band outside of the story of her death. Like, I've never seen that episode of was it Unsolved Mysteries?
Mm-hmm.
Was it Unsolved Mysteries? Or
Yeah.
Was it Forensic Files?
They've done both.
They've done that. Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
that's what I was gonna say.
there's been a lot of stuff about it, but yeah.
So I've never seen any of those TV episodes about her death. And so like anything I learned about her death, I like kind of learned about after like listening to a record, and was like, I had like vaguely knew that she had died probably before listening to The Conquering Chicken, but like didn't really know the details of the story of what happened. And so I'm glad that I've gotten to be able to have as close to an unclouded introduction to the band, because I do see that most of the time they're talked about is with a reference to her death. And I mean, it was kind of unavoidable to talk about it on the show, but I think that they would have been a memorable, important band if she had not died. Because I think they're a really good band. I think there's a core identity to the band that sets them apart from a lot of other punk at the time.
Yeah, so my first introduction to the Gits is actually through the true crime side of things, which is actually pretty unfortunate. I believe I saw the Forensic Files episode on the Gits first, or on Me as a Pod specifically first. And I remember watching the episode and then like not really knowing anything about them. Being told the story of the band through that was weird, because it was just like, I feel like I should have heard of this band, because at that time I hadn't. And I was trying to think of when I would have watched that. I don't know when I would have first listened to this. Maybe there's a chance I probably saw that episode around like 2017 or something like that. And I remember discussing Forensic Files with a friend, and him talking about, there's this one episode about this musician. I was like, oh, I just watched that one too. Like, neither one of us knew anything about the Gits, and that was our first introduction to them as a band. And he's like, I listened to that record, the first record, and it was really good. And so that encouraged me to go listen to it too, and being like, wow, this record is really good, and they're really different kind of band, especially the time and their sound. Like, we can get more into that, but yeah, my introduction was through the Forensic Files episode. I then got into the music. I would have listened to Frenching the Bully, probably Enter the Conquering Chicken, and then by happenstance like watched the Unsolved Mysteries episode later, after I was already familiar with them, because my wife and I we watched every Unsolved Mysteries episode that was available for streaming on at least the Robert Stack era of the show. We've seen every single episode.
The Stack Attack.
And I remember that when that episode came up, I was like, oh, I didn't know they did one on Unsolved Mysteries, because the episode of Forensic Files was made after it was solved, and the Unsolved Mysteries episode was made back in the 90s, when close to when it happened. So it was interesting to see, what was being reported at the time. Yeah, and then just ever since then, I've kind of like listened to mostly everything they've put out. The only thing I haven't listened to is there's like a compilation they did that came out to collect some stuff, and then there's like a live record too. I haven't heard that one yet, but all the studio stuff I've heard. And yeah, just an excellent band that anytime I would pull up one of the years that one of the records came out, I'd consider listening to, and or at least talking about on the show. So yeah.
Hey, you walk in with another headache, I can tell by the lines in your face. You seem to think if you just remove that problem, the answers are what will come. Another shot of whiskey and maybe I'll be ready. What's still crowded in your head? Never thinking that all the good times were walked in with a bed. Don't know why we compromise ourselves. I thought it was a common understanding. With all I've tried to help with, well, tell me why. We'll end up at the end. Another cup of beer while I'm savior at the bar, and maybe I'll give me some rest. Don't know why all the good times have to turn up with the bad. It's like you sort of hate your brand and shit so proud. I wonder if you talk what you feel, or is it the way you gotta cook it in your eye? It would be good if you
We can do a little bit more of the backstory. Zach touched on it a bit there, but the band did initially form in Yellow Springs, Ohio in 1986. They were all students at Antioch College, which is a liberal arts college there in Ohio. And initially, they were named Sniveling Little Rat-Faced Gits, which is a reference to a Monty Python sketch. The sketch is like the Mr. and Mrs. Git was like the sketch. So you might remember that one. Maybe I'll stick a clip in here from that sketch.
Ah, John. Allow me to introduce my next door neighbor, John Stokes. This is a sniveling little rat-faced git.
But they were wound up recording and self-releasing an unofficial debut record in 1988. And this record would later see the light of day in 1996 as the album Kings and Queens. So that is listed on most of the streaming sites. It's just called Kings and Queens. But yeah, it was recorded before Frenching the Bully. But just, I imagine they probably just sold tapes at shows. So then in 1989, they wind up relocating to Seattle, Washington. And they all lived and rehearsed in an abandoned house called the Rat House. It's just like in a weird like district where there were a bunch of abandoned houses, and so they just moved in there. Apparently, a bunch of other musicians also used that same space to rehearse in and crash. And they pretty much immediately enamored themselves to the Seattle scene, specifically the punk scene. They had an amazing live show that definitely attracted a lot of attention. They wound up creating a bunch of buzz, and around this time, due to a lot of like the way the Seattle music scene was kind of blowing up, oftentimes they were lumped in with as either a grunge band or a Riot Girl band, and they really weren't either one of those things. They weren't musically, they're not grunge at all. And the Riot Girl tag, we discussed this on the Patreon, the bracketology we did, where we were talking about Babes in Toyland getting also called Riot Girl. It's a band with a woman in it, and so thusly has to be Riot Girl, but was not really the case. Riot Girl is a very specific thing.
You're not Riot Girl if you don't claim Riot Girl.
Right. And most of these artists from this time period never did claim it. It really was just the Olympia folks for the most part, I think.
Yeah.
Who really claimed that. And so yeah, they released a series of EPs and singles: Precious Blood in 1990, Second Skin in 91, and Spear and Magic Helmet also in 91. And then yeah, they went into the studio and recorded this record. And I didn't really find much story-wise on, going into the studio with the band. I think it might have just been kind of a standard go in there and record type scenario. CZ Records was a Seattle-based record label that had previously released music by the Melvins, 7 Year Bitch, Skinyard, and Tree People prior to this album. So that probably also lumped them in with some of the more grunge bands too. And yeah, there's some more stuff about this afterwards, but that is the main things kind of leading up to this record. So is this actually your first time listening to this album?
Yeah, the full list from beginning to end. This is the first time I've listened to this one. I've heard songs from it previously, but definitely, and like I said, I listened to Enter the Conquering Chicken a couple of years ago, but I haven't spent a considerable amount of time with them. they've just always lived in the edges of my mind, I guess, of just being like, that's a band I should spend more time with, for sure, is like the main thing. But no, I've never listened to this one all the way, which is unfortunate. I think this record is still not talked about enough.
Yeah, this record is excellent. It's definitely just a brilliant record. And I think anyone who listens to them does really enjoy the record. It is one of those cases of the story was so big and overshadows a lot of the actual music that it kind of becomes the thing that only gets talked about and not so much the music, which the members of the band wish was the case. You know, like they definitely want to be talking about their musical output more so than, you know, the awful tragedy after. So we will talk a little bit about that later, but I want to focus primarily right now on the album. So what did you think of this record?
I thought it was a really good record. I really enjoyed listening to it. I think that their sound is, I'm trying to think of the best way to put this, refreshingly backwards.
Backwards?
Because they sound retro, but they don't seem like they were doing a bit. Like they're playing a style of punk that I feel like you really can't call it anything but punk rock. Like it's just, I mean, like they get kind of the punk blues association, but I feel like they don't have the same attitude as the punk blues bands. They don't feel like Nick Cave or Roland S. Howard or the Gun Club. You know, like they don't sound like they have a self-aware kind of, we're doing something. Like it sounds pure. It sounds, if there's a bluesy influence, it sounds like it's just like a natural influence from the music that they listen to. It doesn't sound like they're trying to convince you of anything. I don't know. I'm trying to explain what their music sounds like to me.
Yeah, it's tough. I definitely see like the punk blues thing thrown around a lot when they're discussing them. And I think when they say that, people are probably mostly referring to Mia's voice. I feel like that's probably the thing that is attracting that blues comparison more so than like the actual music of the band. I mean, there's elements that are there, but yeah, I'm trying to think. Like 1992, sonically, I'm just trying to think of like who they sound like. And I don't have a one-to-one comparison at all. Like I can hear like little things. There's a story about while they were still in college, like one summer, one of the members of the band, I think he was from San Francisco, so he went back for the summer and wound up working at like a pretty big punk club. And the band hadn't even been a band yet. So this probably would have been like 86 or so. And it was like San Francisco, he worked sound that summer at the venue and like really got into like all the punk stuff that was happening in San Francisco in around 86. So when he came back to college, that's when he's like, I gotta start a band. And then that's when he got all the members together and they started that. So he's probably like the one with the closest roots to punk music. And I don't know exactly what would have been around when he would have seen them, you know, when he was working there, but I guess there's a chance. It's probably like X and were the Dead Kennedys still? What's the latest the Dead Kennedys go? They go to 88, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, Dead Kennedys may have been playing in 86. See, it's too early for, you know, Op Ivy, Green Day. Like,
yeah, it's too early for that.
Scene. Like it.
And he was playing at one of the bigger clubs too. It's, you know, they break up in, okay, so the Kennedys break up in 86. So there's a chance that maybe this is like 85 or something that he goes. But so yeah, he's
like, were the Avengers active?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how active they were. X would have been active, so they would have been coming up through there. Gun Club probably too. Yeah. So I guess it's like that weird little time period between the first American punk and hardcore wave dying down and then like the next one taking over. So when I listen to this, I could see a world where somebody who was into Dead Kennedys and X and Gun Club doing a record that kind of sounds like this. But also they play it faster than a lot of those bands would have. I mean, I guess Dead Kennedys get pretty fast with their stuff too, but yeah, they're a really unique band. I do think that being in Seattle probably influenced part of their sound. So there is a touch of some grunge in there, I guess, as far as like tone maybe. But the actual songwriting feels very punk, very, very early punk, and not blues punk like your John Spencer Blues Explosion, like that kind of thing. Like I don't hear anything like that in their sound.
Well, I was working in a shithole days. A ball came up to me, said you make a star in that band. I said, so I'm doing this. Why can't you fucking get it? 'Cause all I gotta do is release through these obstacles I'm yet to beat. Release for the man that manipulates me while I break it on my back. Nothing left worth saving. Well, all I gotta do is release through these obstacles I'm yet to beat. Take us to a steady ship, and we'll raise our glasses. I don't find too dodgy here. No, we don't need problems here.
Yeah. So yeah, like I feel like there's something that carries through from like the Sonics and MC5 and like the Stooges, like the proto punk stuff. There's something that carries through from that to the Gits. And I think it definitely goes through your Damned and X, a little bit of Dead Kennedys. You know, that stuff I feel like has, and a little bit of Black Flag. I feel like that stuff kind of has some bearing on what the Gits sound like. But it just seems like they arrive at a sound that's really sloppy and raw. And it's like, it just doesn't fit with most punk in the early 90s.
Yeah, it really
like,
doesn't.
It doesn't. I mean, early skate punk stuff.
No.
Like maybe. Like I feel like Bay Area, like Gilman, like is the closest thing.
Yeah, but that doesn't even really feel right either. You
But
know?
the Gits doesn't sound like a Lookout band.
No, not at all. I was trying to like think of what was the Seattle punk scene like at the time.
Seaweed.
Yeah, Seaweed, Bikini Kill. There's
There's a little bit that's similar to Bikini Kill.
yeah,
And-
and the music feels
Yeah.
a little like Bikini Kill, a little bit, yeah, guitar wise, because Bikini Kill had a little bit of a throwback thing too.
Yeah.
They didn't feel as contemporary. I actually just pulled up posters, the Gits show posters, and they played with Nirvana and Tad. They played.
Makes total sense.
They played with Dead Moon and Strange Fruit. Who else do we have?
See, like Dead Moon would make sense to play with the Gits, but I don't
Yeah.
think they sound like the Gits. Like Dead Moon sounds like a garage rock band.
Yeah, they play with 7 Year Bitch. There's another one called Alcohol Funny Car, which they recorded their first record with one of the guys from that band. Yeah, there's the Viva Zapata shows. Those are different though. Like Everclear played one of those. Yeah, it looks like the Gits with My Name and Voodoo Gear Shift. There's like I don't see the Gits on this flyer. Guns N' Roses with Fastback. Yeah, so it seems like they were primarily playing with just Seattle bands, and Seattle bands are all kind of doing different stuff. Like even the grunge umbrella term, most of those grunge bands don't sound like each other, especially from that time period. So yeah, they're kind of this like freshly unique thing. I mean, they're being from the Pacific Northwest already gives them like a different kind of edge than any SoCal band or any like the East Coast bands even. I feel like the Gits can only exist in a place like the Pacific Northwest, or maybe like the Southeast. Like that's another, like the punk music of the Southeast has its own sound, especially during this time period. Even, yeah, maybe even some Texas stuff like sounds different. So like it's different. It's a different scene. It's a different type of bands playing up there, and it kind of leads to them having a unique sound. I mean, they were in Ohio and they chose to move to Seattle, so they seemed to be very interested in what was going on there, and they didn't choose one of the other, major punk cities to go to. So yeah, it just kind of gives them this wholly fresh sound that is very different. Mia's voice is incredible. Like she has one of the best voices in punk music ever. Like she is such a powerful vocalist, and no one sounds like her. She has such her own voice.
She sounds to me, the only comparison that comes to mind is when if you took Debbie Harry doing her most bluesy, nasty vocal, she doesn't do all the time, and just did that on every song, that's kind of what she sounds like to me.
Yeah, I saw comparisons to the people who call her like Patti Smith like as well.
Yeah, and there's definitely a similarity too of like the rawness and delivery.
Yeah, especially when you get those like higher energy like Patti Smith songs where she like really kind of gets low with her singing, like aggressive, with her voice. Patti Smith is all over the place vocally though. Like she does so much. She has a wide range of different styles of singing that she does that you don't always hear the Patti Smith right away. But yeah, it is very similar to the way Blondie when she gets like real into some of those songs. Yeah, but honestly, like she hits something different that neither one of them hit, and she has more. I feel like she has more power than them in her voice. She very much feels like the star of the band too. Like what everyone else is doing is really different and unique and special, but I don't think it works as well without Mia's voice. Oh, I believe there's like one interview that one of the members of the band did say that she was inspired by Joan Jett as well as a vocalist.
Yeah, I can definitely see a Joan Jett influence. I think even overall there's like a Joan Jett influence to the music too, the type of punk that they're doing. And I think if you take away Mia, what I hear from the band, and like maybe this is where the punk blues thing comes through a little more in the music, I hear a little bit of Social Distortion. If you can think about what Social Distortion sounds like musically, and you take away cartoony Mike Ness on top of it, and just think about the guitar playing, the kinds of stuff they do. That's the closest thing I think musically that's happening at this time. Social Distortion, which again, like that's a band I would think of as being kind of on their own in that sound.
Yeah. Now that I think about it, Social Distortion might have been one of the bands that was mentioned when he went back to San Francisco to work the club. So that actually makes perfect timing.
Yeah,
sense.
I could see him seeing Social Distortion at that time.
Yeah.
Oh, well, yeah. I don't know. The Social Distortion timeline's weird.
Yeah, they were kind of in and out for a period there too. Yeah, I could. That is, now that you mentioned that is like kind of the clearest comparison point I have with just like a completely different vocal style, and the Gits play faster than Social Distortion did.
Yeah,
with more of a hardcore edge. Yeah, this record is great. It punches so hard. It has some really fun moments of melody that are just outstanding. Like to me, when I listen to this record, like the big standout tracks, Another Shot of Whiskey, I think that song's fucking amazing. I love that song. That's my favorite song on the whole record. It's track 2. because like Mia just her voice is huge in that song, and it's got like an angrier kind of edge to it. Absolutely stand out to me. Other big standouts, I really love Cut My Skin, It Makes Me Human. That's kind of like a more mid-paced song, and it's really melodic, but again, like Mia sounds amazing in that song. The opener, Absynth, has this fun kind of like Mediterranean style riffing going on. There is some other like surfy guitar parts on elements of this record too. I want to say, don't remember. Slaughter of Bruce, that's the one. It's kind of dancey, got a little rockabilly, a little surfy sort of thing going in here. That's the one that's like half an instrumental song, like it goes for a really long time before it, her vocals come in. I did think Kings and Queens has some X style guitars on there too as well. Oh, but then like It All Dies Anyway has like a lot of that's like a very Iggy Pop Stooges sort of song. That one feels very similar to like The Passenger, at least the way that they played that one. I was gonna say it had a little like, when it first starts, I'm like, it's a little bit of white reggae, but then leans more into The Passenger. And I could see Iggy Pop being an influence on me as well.
You know what I also got? On some of the fastest songs, I had a weird little bit of Motorhead.
Oh, that's interesting. Something like Insecurities.
Especially that guitar tone, too.
Yeah, it's a gnarly little guitar tone. Like it's
real
kind of
mid-rangey, like it's real creamy, like British guitar tone. Like it's very focused, and I think the mix maybe doesn't do it the most justice. It's definitely a sound that, like, if you can focus in on that on its own, it sounds really cool, but I think it gets a little bit mushy in the rest of the mix. But when it stands out and when it works really well, like, it works really well.
Yeah, there's a couple really fast songs on here. Insecurities is pretty fast-paced, punky song. While You're Still Twisting, I'm Still Breathing. That's another faster one. Wingo Lamo is it's a little bouncier, but it's still got a little punk edge to it. Spear and Magic Helmet has like a more hardcore kind of feel to it. Here's to Your Fuck is real aggro. I really like the last track too, Second Skin. That has like that. That's the one that starts with like that train beat, which also made me think of X too when I heard that. And it's a little bit more of a mid-paced song. Yeah, there's a lot of really good stuff on this record. Because if they did all of one style, I think it would have wound up being kind of repetitive. And this record does not feel repetitive in any way. So for this one, I did all three of the studio albums I listened to. I listened to Kings and Queens, the unofficial record, and all the elements are there. Like, it's very much like, yeah, it's the Gits. That's what they sound like. But it's still like, it's a good, that one came out in 88, I think. It's 4 years before this album. And you could tell it's a pretty young band. Like, the main elements of the band are there. The guitar tone's there. The vocals are there, but it's not quite ready. It's not quite finished. And I assume that's why they chose not to like reissue it while they were, still active. And then I listened to Enter the Conquering Chicken, and that was one that I was like, oh yeah, this is clearly a incomplete record, and they just put everything they had in there. Because there's some silly stuff on that back half too. It's just like, all right, this is a little goofy. I don't know that it would have made the cut, if it was if she'd been able to finish the record with them. So, and then yeah, I didn't listen to that comp or the live record, but I listened to the three studio albums, and this is the best one they have. I mean, it's definitely a what if situation, because one of the stories coming out of this record was that supposedly the band had signed a deal with Atlantic Records, and the next record was going to wind up coming out on Atlantic. There's one story from the A&R rep who says that they signed a deal like 4 days before Mia's passing. And so, yeah, it's one of those what if stories. I imagine some of those sillier moments probably would have been dropped from that record, and they probably would have written some more songs to go on that record, and maybe that would have been the best record they put out. But with what we have, Frenching the Bully is definitely the standout album out of their material.
Yeah, that would have been before even Bad Religion got signed to Atlantic.
Yeah.
Probably, maybe. Or right as Bad Religion got signed to Atlantic.
Yeah, because they released Against the Grain on Epitaph, but then they got a reissue on Atlantic right after.
Or, no, you're thinking of Recipe for Hate.
Yeah, Recipe for Hate, yeah. Yeah, it's definitely... it's one of those what if scenarios that, music history is dotted with.
Yeah, and I think that they've, as we've mentioned, overshadowed by her death, and then also like kind of fell into no man's land of like not keeping stuff in print because of the label. And when were the reissues?
So there have been 2 big rounds of reissues when it comes to the Gits. I'm going to pull up the Discogs real quick to get the release. I know that Broken Records reissued everything.
Yeah, there's a 2003.
So, yeah, Frenching the Bully got... Yeah, 2003 got the CD reissue remaster treatment. 2007, they did a vinyl reissue as well. And then last year, 2024, Sub Pop did a vinyl reissue for Frenching the Bully and a remaster, like a fresh remaster. And they actually did it. They remastered everything digitally for the rest of their catalog, but they haven't done physical for those yet. They might later. I think they had initially were approached to do like a box set by a smaller label, and they were really into the idea, but then there were limitations based on what the label that approached them, had. And so they were like, well, let's do this for real, and let's have somebody big do it, and who has a little bit more resources to put into it. And so they went with Sub Pop, which makes perfect sense. They were a Seattle band, even though they were never on Sub Pop before. They could have been, if they just hadn't signed with CZ, there's a high chance they would have gone with Sub Pop, and they would have fit in perfectly with their catalog. So it makes perfect sense for it to be on Sub Pop. And yeah, those were all just done last year. So there might be physical for the later records, but Frenching the Bully was the number one to get out of the way. We could do a little bit of what happened after this record. So Mia does wind up getting murdered, going home after a show, I believe. I think that's what the story is. And the band decided, okay, we're obviously not going to try and replace her, and they broke the group up. They wound up doing a bunch of benefit shows and having people do benefit shows to help raise money to hire a private investigator to work on the case, which feels like a very punk DIY thing to do. It's just like, we'll solve our own murders by not using cops. I mean, the cops worked with the private investigator, but it feels like they didn't feel like the cops were doing enough, so that's why they went with a private investigator. So they raised a bunch of money, and they did a bunch of shows, and they used basically all the profits they ever made to help fund this investigation. The members of the band started a new group called Dancing French Liberals of 48, and it's all the members of the band. And apparently Joan Jett and Kathleen Hanna wrote and released a song called Go Home, and they reached out to Joan Jett and asked if she would like to tour with the Gits and help raise money for the investigation. And so Joan Jett apparently was like a fan of the Gits and really enjoyed their music, so she agreed to do it. And they did a tour together where they were called Evil Stig, which was Gits Live or Gits Live backwards. And they did a mix of Gits and Joan Jett songs live. And they even did a record together. And then all that money that they raised for that tour and everything went to more investigation into it. It hit a dead wall. I mean, it hit a wall, and the investigation kind of fizzled out. But it was eventually solved due to a DNA hit in the system. So they found someone, arrested them, matched the DNA profile, and that person has since died in jail. So the murder has been solved, and they've done documentaries about the band. There's one specifically that's just about Mia. There's one about like the whole band. They've done some benefit shows. They created a self-defense nonprofit that existed for a good, I think 2010 is when they finally stopped being a thing. But yeah, they took something that was like horrifically tragic and tried to do positive with it. And one of the things that they wanted to do was always kind of like focus on the music and who Mia was, as a person and a personality, and not to focus so much on her death and the tragedy and the darkness of that story. Which I think we're at a point now with the records being reissued in 2024. I think it's the right time. It's been long enough since, the case was solved, that people can now refocus on the music and what made them special. And it is all what if, but I have no doubts that they would have continued to put out records because they all seem like close friends, and they, all these years later are still like doing shows together. So I think that band would have stuck around for a while. If they got on Atlantic and maybe that record does something, maybe it doesn't. You never know with major labels. Maybe even if the Atlantic deal falls through, I feel like they would have continued as a band anyway and gone with another label. And yeah, we probably would have had a whole bunch of great records from them. But what we have now is just this excellent record, and then a bunch of other just really good songs on the other albums that they put out. So yeah, it's tough. This is one of those cases of like the band's legacy is not a positive legacy, but they're making an effort to change that. I mean, I highly recommend it. If you've never listened to this album before or any of the Gits stuff before, I highly recommend you listen to this one. It's an excellent record. One of the best of the entire year, 1992. And yeah, you have any final thoughts on it?
No, I'm just glad to have finally like properly listened to the record and dug a little deeper. Really a one of a kind band. I do genuinely think that like, all of the like trying to pinpoint like, well, what does this sound like? What does that sound like? It's like, it's one of those things you just like kind of do when you're faced with something that sounds really unique. Which I think that's what the Gits are. I think that's why they've stuck with people and that, we're into them then or have come across them later. And like, I do think they should be better remembered, especially for their music, because I think it is a one of a kind band.
And how crazy is it that Zach saw them? We didn't really talk about that, but as a kid, Zach got to see the Gits, which is mind blowing. I was not going to shows at like 9 years old or whatever age he said.
13. Seeing them, like, yeah,
that is amazing. That is amazing to have seen them, because that's a small list of people. Yeah, if you were in Seattle, you probably saw them. But Pacific Northwest, that's probably where the most amount of people saw them, because I don't know how big of tours they did prior to that. I don't know if they even did any national tours at all. So yeah, that is rare air to be in. So that's amazing. So you want to give it a rating?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty solid 4.25.
I'm gonna give it a 4.5. That's where I'm at. 4.5 out of 5. Just excellent record. We didn't really mention it, but it's only 30 minutes long, and for a 1992 record, that's kind of short. So yeah, I don't even have that typical complaint that I usually have of too long. No, it's just right. It did not overstay its welcome. Yeah, so I'm gonna sit at a 4.5. So excellent record. Highly recommend people check it out. And Zach, thank you so much for choosing this album for us to talk about and sending your voice message in. And like we said at the top, if you want to choose an album that we devote an entire episode to, patreon.com/punklaudapod, $10 tier. And that will do it for us. So thank you all so much for listening. You can follow us on all forms of social media at punklaudapod, punklaudapod@gmail.com, and our voicemail line 202-688-PUNK. So if you have any thoughts that you'd like to share with us, hit us up. We have a voicemail that I've been meaning to play, but it never felt right to play it anywhere. So maybe we'll do it next week when it's just the two of us. So we should be good. But all right, everyone, thank you so much. Talk to you next time.
To order Punk, call the number on your screen. Rush delivery is available. Remember, this special offer is not sold in stores.